Hello, and welcome to the sixth webinar of our professional development series on how to write academic papers. This webinar focuses on how to choose the right theory or theories for your research paper, and my name is Rahul Mitra. So you know what your paper does, and you're pouring through research to read textbooks and journal articles to look for the right theory to use for your paper. But you probably come across so much literature and so many different theories that you're not sure which one to pick. So how do you decide? I'm going to offer a few selection strategies for you. And basically, I'm going to ask you to think about these four things and keep them in mind when you are selecting the right theories for your research paper. First is the context. So keep in mind the particular context that you are interested in for your research paper. Are you looking at something that is occurring in organizational context or in health context? Or are you looking at mediated context, whether it's mass media or social media? Because even though the different theories might all be looking at, say, information sharing or social support issues, there's going to be a difference in terms of how social support is offered in organizational contexts versus online media. And so the theories which address the specific contexts that you are most interested in your research paper, those should be the ones you gravitate towards. So once you have the research context, it's important to go and look at the levels as well. So what is the specific level that you are interested in? A lot of times when we talk about research levels in academia, we talk about macro level, which is the broad cultural level, the meso level, which is sort of intermediate, and the micro level, which is supposed to be interactional. But sometimes these macro, meso, and micro levels can be a little confusing for people just starting out on the research process. And so you might want to consider the actual site of research that you are interested in. So for instance, are you looking at social or cultural issues? Are you looking at how something occurs across different institutions or across different organizations? Or are you specifically looking at something which is internal to a specific organization? You could even go even deeper and say, well, even within an organization, you want to look at really what's happening at individual units, say divisions or groups. You could also think about institutions apart from organizations, so like families, for instance, and community units. And finally, of course, you could look at the interactional level and look at really, really small groups or even dyads or couples to really look at the interaction occurring between them. So again, depending on the level that you're interested in, that your topic is really focused on, choose the right theory that also tends to look at that particular level. Third is, of course, the goal. All theories will have a specific goal in mind. And when you look at and you compare the goals of these different theories, it's useful to see what the focus of these goals really are. So in this example, for instance, you've got uses and gratification theory and agenda setting theory. And both of them are really concerned with how people use media, right? But uses and gratification theory has a very clear audience focus in its goal, because its goal really is all about how audiences will use different media to satisfy various gratifications that they have. Whereas with agenda setting, the focus is very much on whoever designs the message, because the goal of agenda setting theory is to find out how messages can be designed clearly so that the basic agenda within those messages can be also adopted by the audience of those messages. Finally, it's important to realize that the assumptions that each theory makes about ontology, epistemology, and axiology matter a great deal. Or in other words, you want to look at how the theories understand the nature of the social world, how they understand the nature of knowing something, and of course, the role of the researcher in that process, respectively. And you want to make sure that these assumptions that the theory makes are consistent with the assumptions that you are actually trying to make also when you are thinking about, what research question or issue you want to utilize. So the example over here, for instance, would be the difference between cultural studies versus agenda setting. Both of these theories, for instance, also look at the role of media in broader society. But cultural studies has a very different set of assumptions about ontology, epistemology, and axiology compared to agenda setting. So cultural studies tends to adopt a very critical, interpretive, and subjective way of thinking about these issues, whereas agenda setting definitely stems from a post-positivist and realist perspective. So depending on your research question, depending on how you view yourself as a researcher, you are going to gravitate towards one or the other of these theories. Let's look at a couple of examples. So on the left-hand side, you've got a summary of all the different communication theories that are pretty much tackled in this textbook, which I'm utilizing right now for my comm theory graduate seminar. And on the right-hand side, we're going to consider a few research questions, actually 3 research questions in particular. And I'm going to talk about how those 3 research questions can draw from some of the theories on this left-hand side. So let's take the first research question, which actually was generated by a student of mine. And so this first research question asks, how does a particular organization, let's call it organization A, talk about race in its diversity statements, annual reports, and other corporate communication? So since we're using this particular textbook, it was natural that we gravitated towards a few theories from this textbook that spoke really to this research question and its underlying assumptions. This research question is very much a social constructionist, interpretive, and even critical research question. And so it stands to reason that the theories from the textbook that the student is gravitating towards includes symbolic interactionism, organizational culture, and multiple stakeholder model. And the reason why is because each of these theories explain, the broader symbols and social discourses occurring at the social level. They look at the culture within organizations and how this culture influences people's behavior within the organizations. And it also looks at how different organizations can engage with multiple stakeholders. And all of these different issues are liable to become really important when it comes to this particular research question. But as you can see from these 3 theories, they don't necessarily have an explicit focus on race, which is a primary part of this particular research question. And so that's why the students really also drew from corporate responsibility to race theory, which he found from outside this textbook, and combined it with these theories to understand how this organization can really talk about race in its corporate communication. Let's look at a second example. How do people negotiate new friendships on social media? This is a research question. So based on the theories on the left-hand side, there are a few of them which become really quite good fits for this particular research question. In particular, social penetration theory, which is all about how people will gradually reveal themselves to each other as a relationship deepens to understand each other. There's also uncertainty reduction theory, which also looks at relational development, but takes a somewhat different tack by focusing on the trying to reduce the uncertainty that often comes about in new relationships. But both of these theories also tend to only look at the new friendships part of this research question and not necessarily on the social media part of this research question. And that is why the student who suggested this research question also gravitated towards media multiplexity theory, which is another theory which really focuses on how people utilize different social media and mass media for different uses, and how all of these different mediated uses are connected together. Finally, our last example is the research question, which asks, how does documentary, say, let's call it B, frame people's relationship to the environment? So basically, we are taking a very media-based approach to people's behavior and people's understanding. But at the same time, it is also a very interpretive and almost potentially critical perspective that this research question tends to take. And so because of that, this student was drawing from cultural studies on the one hand, from the list of theories in the textbook, and especially discourse studies, which is an important component of cultural studies, but also framing theory, which allows people to really look at how particular frames in the media sort of and influence their thinking on different issues. That being said, there are a few caveats when it comes to selecting the right theories and mixing theories together. And so the first caveat is that the research question is really, really important, especially when it comes to deciding which theories to use. It's not enough to only focus on the broad topic. It is important to focus on what specifically you think you want to really uncover in your research paper. So the research question will determine which theory or combination of theories you will use in your paper. And you could use different combinations in two papers addressing the same issue if the two papers have very different research questions. So you don't necessarily have to use the same theory to address the same topic in different papers. It really depends on what part of the topic your research question is really interested in. The second caveat is that theories should be combined in a complementary way across those context levels and assumptions that we considered earlier. But this combination, this complementary combination, really again depends on what your research question is, which means you should also be a little careful about too many combinations, because if you have too many combinations, that can really get a little difficult and tricky to still make sense of whatever you're doing. And last but not the least, knowing the limitations of different theories is really, really helpful, because it's only through combining and in a complementary fashion the different theories together, or maybe generating new theories together entirely using grounded theory, can you really extend knowledge and extend theories. But at the same time, you can't really extend something if you don't know where its existing limitations lie. And so it's really important to understand the limitations of each theory so that you can actually generate and create new theory. So that's it for now. Thank you so much, and take care.